So I think we might have a few latecomers, but I think at this point it's probably a good idea to kick off. So thank you all for joining today's session on personalisation. It's the first one for ORM for 2020, and I guess this is a headline summary of the state of the industry and how organisations are adopting personalisation in today's market. So it won't go into too much detail, but it will give some really good hints and tips on how to get started going forward. So, my name's Leona Bell, and I currently look after data here at the ORM agency. So, some of you may or may not have met me, but I'm a very big advocate on data and insights, and we are currently doing some personalisation with a number of our clients here in order to help improve the customer experience and drive business engagement. So let's start off with the definition of personalisation. There are many, but I think the one that probably applies more broadly across all spectrums can probably be the one that is described quite nicely by Monetate. So it's looking at the practice of creating personal experiences, and it's being delivered by showing dynamic content or products based on previous behaviour and engagement with an organisation or some platform of some type that an organisation is responsible for delivering. So these types of engagements can be looking at things like browsing behaviour, purchase history, demographics, and quite often content engagement as well. So personalisation isn't actually a strategy. However, it is an approach, and it's an approach that can be used to help deliver a strategy that's related to digital objectives that are directed at improving customer experience and making sure that it's looking at ways in which to help users along their journey across your different points. Why personalise? Good question. Well, there's lots of very good reasons why you should personalise. And here I've put together a short list of 5. So at the very, very foundations, I think customer experience has to be at the heart of why you should personalise. We've come a long way in this industry, and users of various different platforms like to be treated in a way that is going to aid their experience in their journey with you. So improving the customer experience is a great reason to personalize. Making customers happy, making them enjoy the time that they spend with you, and making them want to come back to you has got to be one of the number one reasons to personalize customer experiences. In line with that is the increased loyalty and engagement that a customer experience being personalised can drive. So better experiences will lead to better engagement, and better engagement will naturally lead to increased loyalty. Aligning with increased loyalty and engagement is sales. So if you have a transactional website, even if you don't, if your website is actually one that has specific goals but doesn't necessarily result in some sort of transaction with a monetary value, this still applies. So what you will find is that an increased loyalty and engagement will actually lead to more users reaching those goals that you have set out for that website, and increasing the sales if it's actually a transactional website at the same time. And where there's increased sales, there's increased revenue. So, you know, whether it be that those who would not necessarily have converted before based on a better customer experience are now converting, or whether it's that those who have converted before, but due to the increased customer experience are now coming back and making more purchases and spending more money, that also leads to increased revenue. And last but not least, increased conversion. So by personalizing an experience, what you'll tend to find is that it's a catch-all situation where you find many people who may not have been on the brink or on the journey to actually converting are nudged a little bit closer in that direction, and better experiences lead to increased loyalty and engagement. That in return results in an increased number of sales. Sales equals more revenue, and when you add it all together, the end result is increased conversions. So if we look at the figures, and there are a lot of surveys out there, and these surveys come in all different shapes and forms. And I've picked out Gartner here from 2018, and there's some really interesting figures here. So the Gartner survey found that 14% of average marketing budget has been spent on personalization. Does that come as a surprise? Probably not. However, what does come as a surprise is that 66% of respondents can't remember the last time a brand actually exceeded their expectations. So if we think back to ourselves, when was the last time we felt like a brand actually exceeded our expectations? I think it will probably be quite difficult to find an example of that. So is it a surprise when you think about it? Probably not. 81% of marketing leaders say they expect to be competing mostly on the basis of customer experience. So customer experience doesn't always mean personalization. It can mean a number of different things, but personalization will definitely be a feature of customer experience. And 87% of marketeers are confident that they will be delivering a winning customer experience. So it's interesting that you have that 66% and that 87% there, because the two are slightly at odds. But I guess the 87% are confident that they will be making some serious strides in the right direction going forward into the future. So what we have here is a little look at the landscape of personalization. So what I've charted here is business value versus sophistication. So personalization comes in many different shapes and forms, some very, very minor, some very, very complex and sophisticated. And what you generally tend to find is that the lower the business value, the lower sophistication. And unsurprisingly, the higher the business value, the more sophisticated the delivery and program of personalization will be. So at the lower end of the scale, you have very, very simple personalization options, like just personalizing based on device. So knowing that somebody is on a desktop versus a mobile, and how you personalize an experience based on that. Knowing where somebody is, so whether that be understanding that they are in a particular region, so that you can send them some sort of push notification, or so that you can personalize based on things that are relevant to that particular area of the country. And then you have, at the other end of the scale, you have more complex and sophisticated personalization that starts to look at cross-channel behavior and personalizing an experience based on a user's interactions across all of those different touch points. So what is good personalization? Well, good personalization tailors a user's experience based on all of those things that we've touched on previously. So that's looking at previous behavior, that's trying to predict what the behavior might be in future, and then it's trying to deliver a more engaging experience based on what we've learned and what we predict, so that we can increase loyalty. And if it's a transactional website, drive sales. If it's not, then it might be to drive signups or hit a specific goal that relates to content engagement. So some of the basic principles to good personalization, I've highlighted here just 4 of those. And really, I think they can be summed up quite simply as consistency, context, content, and over personalization. So With consistency, it's making sure that whichever platform or medium that you are choosing to interact with your audience with, that there is a consistent brand messaging and experience, and that doesn't vary from platform to platform in terms of its consistency and its message. In terms of context, it's ensuring that you are providing context that is relevant to that user at that point in time. So an example of this can be location, or if it was something like a returning visit to a website, maybe you want to be presenting them with some previous content that they engaged with, or even feeding them back into the point in the journey where they last left you. Dynamic content is about using behavior to dynamically tailor content through the journey. So I suppose it's a bit more real-time personalization, because it's not necessarily relying on somebody to leave and come back, and it doesn't have a huge amount of time delay between first and next visit. It's actually being able to use the information that it's gaining at that point in time to actually dynamically on the fly serve up relevant content. And then there's over personalization, or as I like to call it, death by personalization. And this looks at how an organization can be sure that even though they are collecting quite a wealth of data points on each individual user that engage with them as a organization, you don't necessarily have to try to be too clever and personalize every inch of a customer's experience with you. It's about picking out the bits that are relevant based on what we've learned from history, based on what we predict in the future. What do we think would be the most relevant points of their previous and future behaviors that we should be personalizing on, and is not about necessarily proving to anybody that you know absolutely every single thing about them. So I've pulled out a good example of personalization here, and you may or may not have seen this before, but the example that I have chosen here is Very, and I have chosen it for some very simple reasons, which is that it's good, it's simple, and it has a really good way of engaging and using geolocale to try and provide relevant content that has the right context to it. So if we see this landing page, you'll see that it looks quite generic, but actually, if you start to look a little bit deeper, you'll find that this website has identified who the user is without them even logging in. So you'll see that the sign in and register options are still there, which means that this person hasn't actually signed in yet. But based on history, they've got a pretty good idea who this is, and they think it's Nikki. So they've got a little welcome message for Nikki, and they've said hi to Nikki, welcome back. They've also identified geolocale. They know where Nikki is. They know where she's logging in from. And from this, they've worked out that actually it's pretty cold where Nikki is. It's only 5 degrees, and it's also cloudy and rainy. So what can they do to help Nikki in her experience with them for this visit? Well, they have personalized Nikki's returning landing page experience. And they've said, hi, Nikki, it is quite cold outside. You should wrap up. So they've identified where she is. They know it's cold. They know it's rainy, and they're giving her some good advice. And in doing so, what they've done is they've created a personalized experience without having a negative effect, without over-personalizing. And they've just made a little recommendation on the basis that given it's cold and it's wet, Nikki might actually be looking for a new overcoat, which is what they've presented to her there. So, personalization, we've talked about, has a wide range of options that you can explore when it comes to implementing your own personalization program. But how do people get started? Well, It's not about literally going out and buying the most expensive enterprising systems, you know, sorting out lots of software licenses and trying to implement a massive program of change. Actually, there's a three-step process, and you can do this really, really simply. Crawl, walk, then run. So crawl is about saying, dipping your toe into the market. Starting off small, it usually has lower effort, lower cost, and can often deliver some very, very quick, tangible results. Once you start to get into the habit of doing really simple, easy to do personalization, usually based on locale or mobile device, then you can start to walk. And walk involves actually starting to engage more from a campaign perspective and starting to actually present content which is relevant to different devices, different locales, but also involves maybe other channels like email or notifications. And then running normally looks at doing a number of different more complex things, like trying to integrate platform to platform knowledge and insight of how different users are engaging with the organization across platform. It usually looks at trying to stitch those interactions together into one unique ID, and then I guess it helps to feed into that single customer view so that you can try to present a more holistic approach to personalization. So you've decided on an approach, whether you crawl, walk, or run, but how do you get started? Well, there are 5 key areas that need to be considered when you get started. And when you're getting started, it doesn't matter whether it's a small, medium, or a large size project, it still requires planning. So in the planning of the personalization project, you need to consider strategy, you need to consider the tools and integration, you need to consider audience segmentation, you need to consider your content, and you also need to consider data. So within the strategy side of the program, you need to think about what, why, who, and how the personalization is going to be activated. So what kind of personalization do you want to deliver? Why do you want to deliver that? Who are you going to deliver it to? And how is it going to be delivered? Within tools, you need to think about assessing your current stack. What current tools do you have in place that can actually help you deliver your crawl program that's going to get you started? Are there any limitations to this stack, or do you need to add anything in order to help you get off the ground? Do some research, speak to some vendors, find out how well your current stack might integrate with some new tools. And once you know the limitations, you can help to caveat or work around some of those limitations for your crawl program. Audience segmentation is about understanding the different segments that you want to target. So as part of your who in the strategy, audience segmentation piece is where you define the details on that who. So creating different rule sets to help segment the different who's within your audience segmentation. So is it defined on behavior? Is it defined on technology? Are you going to target people based on location? These are all of the things you need to think about when defining the who within your audience. Then there's the content. So what is it you want to say? How do you want to present to this audience? And it needs to be relevant to the type. So of the who's, what content do you want to show them? Do you want to show the same content to a number of different segments in the Who, or do you want to show different content to every single segment in the Who? So you need to determine what experience the different audience types should receive, and then determine how you change that content after each engagement with those audiences. And then last but not least, as a data advocate myself, the data is so very important. So you need to set out and establish how that personalization program is going to be measured. So that means defining KPIs, putting a measurement framework in process, and the point of that is so that when you deliver a piece of personalization, you actually have something to measure it against. You actually have some KPIs that you know are going to be there to help understand whether that particular personalization program has been a success or not, whether the dial has shifted in the right direction, and whether it's something that you want to repeat, or how much you can learn from it to optimize further activity in the future. So personalization is something that, as talked about before in all the stats, everybody agrees it's a massive benefit, and has a desire to do it within their organization, over the coming years. But why do we think so many organizations have not yet cracked it in terms of, the amount of organizations delivering it at scale? I think from past experience, speaking to a number of different organizations, many have described themselves not even at being crawl stage, but being at pre-crawl stage, which means that many are finding it challenging even just to get to the crawling stage. So by having a think about that, I've come up with some of the reasons why this can actually be a challenge to getting it right and getting it off the ground. So the first one is lack of resources. So with all of the many different business initiatives that organizations have in place these days, quite often not having the people to be able to dedicate to a personalization program can often be a reason why personalization programs don't get off the ground, because there just isn't the resource to put into it in order to do the planning of the strategy and the assessment of the tools, and the mapping out of the segments and the audiences, defining of the content, and then obviously data. That takes a lot of different people, a lot of different areas of the business, and quite often organizations can't spare people from every single part. So they might be able to spare one or two, but not enough to complete a well-rounded strategy. So the number two is quite closely linked to number one. So, having lack of resources often means no strategy. Not having the people to create that strategy, or sometimes, organizations might embark in something, maybe just as a test or something to get their feet wet, but there isn't actually a defined strategy or a measurement process with clearly defined KPIs so that the business can tell whether it was a success or not. Number three is poorly implemented tools. And I think it's fair to say that this reason is not something that you will only hear with regards to personalization. You'll hear it across the board with lots of different business challenges, having poorly implemented tools, or having legacy tools that are, no longer in line with what the business is currently trying to achieve, can often slow down progress. So whether it's a case of the tool is poorly implemented, or it's not flexible enough, and it doesn't integrate with other tools very well, that can mean a slowdown in progress, because quite often it means that those particular tools are in the business so long and are often connected to so many things or holding so much data that it can be a real real challenge to make any changes around this area or try to make it work with other third-party solutions. Number 4 is process and validation. So we've talked about having strategy, we've talked about having KPIs, but once you're actually implementing your personalization program, you need to be able to validate everything that you're personalizing, because personalization in some ways is a bit like a testing program, and so you need to be able to show whether this test is working or not. Should we continue on this road, or should we make some changes? Is it a case of that piece of content didn't work, or is it a case of it wasn't right for that particular audience segment? So these are the things that need to be understood, and in order to do that, there needs to be a process for testing and validating those hypotheses. And last but not least, knowledge. So there aren't a huge amount of different departments that would be dedicated to doing things like personalization, even if you have a customer experience team, you still might not have a personalization function. And so I think it's fair to say you don't know what you don't know. And lack of knowledge on personalization and what's involved and what it takes to get started can be a huge barrier to getting your program off the ground, because lack of knowledge can often see a lack of planning and a lack of conversation. It can see a lack of business support, and ultimately can see a lack of personalization to the end user. So for all of these reasons, you often find that it causes a significant challenge to the business to get started. It means that the programs can often not gain momentum, and as a result, they can't prove their value. So what would I say the key takeaways are? Well, I think it's fair to say that personalization, it would be agreed, improves customer experience. That's what it's there to do. And not only does it improve the customer experience, but if the customer is happy, then the organization is happy too. The landscape is vast. There is lots of different options, offering lots of different entry points. So it's not just about saying you need to invest, £2 million in a new platform and license fees, and a whole team needs to be created in order to develop this. You can start small. You can dip your toe in that water, and you can scale up as you go along. It's clear to say that the most sophisticated approaches do deliver the highest value, but you do need to work your way towards that. So that is something that you can aim for. And within, high value, most sophisticated, there are a number of different options as well. And some of them might not be right for your organization. That's part of the assessment process, working out what is right for you and what isn't right for you. It requires strategy. So this is very, very clear. You have to plan. You have to make sure that that plan takes into account all the different areas that need to feed into the program being a success. So you need strategy. You need to make sure you have the right technology to start you off in your crawl phase, but even understand what you might need in the future to get you from crawl to walk to run, and it might be a phased implementation of that. You need to review your data, know what you're working with, what is your baseline, what is your starting point, how are you going to measure the success of this program? And in order to do that, you need to understand where we are now, to understand what we want to get to in the future. And then when you are running these programs, you can measure and see how you're tracking on that journey from now to the goal of where you want to get to in the future. Make sure you understand your segments, who you want to talk to, what you want to say to them, how you want to say it, and then you deliver that with brilliant dynamic content. And lastly, but not least, understanding some of the biggest challenges to why an organisation may not be hitting the ground running with personalisation is a great learning curve, because once you understand what some of these challenges are, you can actually start to address them. Some organisations may have a challenge in each of these areas, and some might only have a challenge in just one or two. But no matter what it is, these barriers are not barriers which can't be overcome. So whether it's internal tech, whether it's a skills and processes issue, these can all be addressed, but understanding what they are and how you can start to alleviate some of these concerns, it's definitely something that gives you an advantage when it's time to start your delivering of personalisation. So that's it from us today, but what I did want to mention at the end here is we're offering a free digital audit, so you know, you're more than welcome to take us up on that offer. There's a QR code here, so if you'd like to have a scan and see what we can do when the audit details pop up, feel free to, or you're more than welcome to get in touch with us directly if you have any problems with that as well. So thank you for your time today. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. I'll have a quick look and then I'll do my best to answer some of those. Okay. Right, so we have a couple of questions here. The first question is, how do we begin to assess where we're at when it comes to personalisation? What are the questions we should be asking ourselves? So that's a really good question. When it comes to assessing where you are with personalisation, the first question is, are you doing any personalisation at all? And if you are doing personalisation, would you say you are at a pre-crawl, crawl, or running stage? So remember, I showed you that there's a landscape of personalisation. There's the levels of sophistication with the business value, and at the early side of that, you've got things like just doing sort of geolocation and device-led personalisation. So that's one way of looking at it. So are you doing any personalisation at all? If so, is there a strategy in place? How has that personalisation program come about? Are you working against some specific guidelines, or is it more of a sort of test and learn where you don't necessarily have a strategy, but what you do have is a couple of test ideas, and that's what you're testing your personalisation based on? So in order to understand whether you are doing personalisation well or not, I would say to some degree, it's not necessarily about comparing yourself to any other competitors. It's about making sure you have an assessment of your business and what it is you're trying to achieve. And by having a strategy, it will help you understand at what point you have come to in your personalisation. Asking yourselves, do we know what we want to achieve? Do we have clear goals? Have we defined those goals? Do we have a measurement framework in place? What are the key KPIs that we're measuring against? Why are we doing what we're doing? Who do we want to talk to with each personalisation program or instance that we're delivering? So some of those questions are the ones that I would be asking ourselves so that we know whether we're even considering everything as part of the strategic planning process, let alone in terms of how we are delivering our personalisation. So I have another question here, which is, how can we make personalisation work when it comes to privacy issues and the likes of GDPR? So one of the things that I would say is that when it comes to privacy issues and GDPR, any personalisation solution that you use should be GDPR compliant, and any any visitor that comes to your website or one of your platforms should be agreeing to your consent program, so your preference consent program. And with regards to how you treat that user knowledge, everything you should be doing should be in line with data protection and making sure that it is following the strict GDPR guidelines. So I think quite rightly so, there is a concern about privacy in GDPR. However, a lot of third-party vendors these days have done a lot of work to make sure that a lot of the tools are GDPR compliant. And even if you have an in-house tool or solution, there should have been some guidance from either a developer or an external auditor who would have come in and made sure that all of the data capture and storage for that meets the GDPR guidelines. So, I have another question. You'll have to bear with me on the pauses because I'm reading them before I read them to you. So, next one is about the barriers. So, barriers commonly seen. How have you worked with customers to overcome these? Okay, so one of the things that we do at ORM is we do have a strategy team here. So I know I'm talking a lot about strategy, but we have a number of different departments. So we have a strategy team, we have developers, we have data guys, you know, it's in my team, and we help customers in a number of different ways to overcome these problems. So sometimes it's about providing guidance and saying, this is our assessment of your business. So if I go back to the previous question that says, how do we assess where we're at when it comes to personalization? One of the things that we can do is we can help you with that assessment if you so please, or you can try and make an internal assessment of yourself. So some of the things that we have done with clients is we've helped in an assessment of the work that they have done on a testing program, and we've helped them to understand how their personalization is working. If it's not working, we have done things like delivered a personalization strategy. We have helped them by setting up a program of personalization with them. We have delivered training on personalization, and one of the things that we always recommend is getting stuck into the data and really understanding the current behaviors of the users and how we think that we can affect those with a personalization program in the future. So that's some of the things that we've done to try and overcome barriers, because a lot of those barriers are internal, and if internal constraints mean that they can't add resource, then sometimes we often add resource. And if it means not knowing what tools or solutions might be the right ones to use, then we can help provide some guidance on that. And if it's about saying, you know, not having the knowledge, then we happily sit with people and help them understand that process in order to gain more knowledge, and so on and so on. So we've helped organisations in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's throughout the whole program, and sometimes it's just, you know, some aspects of that program. So there's lots of different options that you can take. Oh, this is a nice personal one. So what are recent good examples of personalization to use? So obviously I showed the very one, but I'm guessing you mean, you know, what have I experienced personally to myself that I thought was good personalization? It's really difficult to say because of the nature of my role. I have quite high expectations, and B, I also am quite a fussy user when it comes to being online, because I know how much data is being captured. But I think a good example has to be something like a Netflix. they're not just simple. They don't just say, you've looked at X in the past, so you're likely to like exactly the same thing in the future. They actually draw more on a lot of the detail of each of the items that you've watched, and they pick out particular themes, and then they broaden out what the recommendations are that they make to you. So that was one good example. Another good example was when I caught the train to another city, and I received a text message notification that basically said, hi, you're in, I can't remember where it was, Manchester or Liverpool, and they said, why don't you check out one of our branches on whatever street, and they were able to tell me that it was roughly within sort of 15 minutes from where I was, with a map and everything. And I thought, well, that was quite interesting, because A, it was unexpected, B, it was quite handy, and C, it had been done in quite a friendly way, with a nice little offer at the bottom as well. So it was incentivized with some loyalty engagement promo there. So that was another example for me. I think that's it for the questions. So if I just go back to that previous slide, if you would like a digital audit, then do scan the QR code there. And if you need some sort of free and friendly advice on, you know, what you could start looking at for personalization, then do feel free to get in touch and have a chat with us. Otherwise, there's nothing left to say other than thank you for joining us today, and hopefully you have found it useful. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.